find something that works, it seems that the other, within a few centuries, sort of comes up with the same idea or a similar insight in their sort of own way or own metaphors. But meditation is so interesting because there doesn't really seem to be a strong Western counterpart. I guess maybe prayer is one, but why do you think that is? It is such a magical thing that works for so many people, but there's not really a super long Western independent tradition of something similar.
Yeah, there is considerable overlap between some of the Eastern traditions, especially Buddhism, and some pieces of what I would consider the wisest pieces of Western philosophy. But I think a major difference is the methodology of meditation and just the systematic approach to studying the mind from the first person side, from the contemplative side. That really got built out in the East in a way that it didn't in the West. I think largely because some of the religious assumptions were different, and I mean, you can just like in the Buddhist canon in particular, you can get whole rafts of just meditation guidance, which are almost perfectly designed for export into a secular context, because it really is purely empirical and phenomenological, and apart from some metaphysical framing and some iconography that sneaks in there, I mean, they're whole passages that you could lift out, and it would be a very modern analysis of the nature of consciousness, or the nature of the mechanics of psychological suffering. And whereas in the West, especially in the once, I'm not speaking so much about Greek and Roman philosophy here, but once Christianity and Islam really got rolling, you have this Abrahamic, dualistic, propitiatory, prayer-based relationship to the divine, which basically swallows everything. And so there's a difference, but yeah, I would say that within the Greek and Roman tradition, obviously, Stoicism is your wheelhouse, and there's really significant overlap between Stoicism and Buddhism. But prior to that, I would say that Greek skepticism has a lot of wisdom to share.
Don't sink. Don't sink.
Just kind of bracketing our moment-to-moment experience with a non-conceptual, non-clinging, non-judgmental attitude. You just knowledge is provisional, and yet your being is the unity of your existence, and your awareness of the moment can't really be doubted, and you just to rest there, contemplatively.
Yeah, there's a line. Is it Flaubert or Proust where he says, between Cicero and Marcus Aurelius, when the gods had ceased to be and the Christ had not yet come, man stood alone in the universe. Now his timeline's not strictly true. That's not really how it all lines up exactly. But it does strike me there is a moment there, sort of when the Greeks lead into the Romans, where the old system is falling apart, but the sort of monotheistic Christian God has not sort of fully come to dominance. That there was an opportunity in Western philosophy to chance upon some of the same ideas in Eastern philosophy that we're talking about, the sort of secular, sort of singular, the idea of stillness and emptiness and clarity. It's like the Stoics and some of the other philosophers, they're dancing around it, but they don't seem to ever settle on the idea that you can sit there and clear your mind, focus very intently on a singular idea, and that in and of itself is kind of a spiritual and philosophical pursuit. There's some irony in that Marcus Aurelius' book is called Meditations, but he's not doing any meditating in the sense that we understand it now.
Right. Yeah, I think it all turns on the nature of the self, or the illusoriness of the self, and just what it is, what's there to be discovered if you pay sufficient attention to what it's like to be you moment to moment. And I mean, the Stoics certainly understand that on some level your mind is all you have, and they're living with your reactivity, and and the difference between happiness and suffering is almost entirely a matter of understanding that process and relinquishing your unnecessary suffering, which really is just self-imposed, the way you're reacting to experience and the way you're framing it conceptually, the way you're attributing to the world so much power to move you around emotionally. And so when you understand something of the mechanics there, as the Stoics do, then you have a degree of freedom that you otherwise wouldn't, and you can cease to suffer in all kinds of ordinary and unnecessary ways. But the center of the jewel of Eastern philosophy, and again Buddhism, and I would say the tradition of Advaita Vedanta in the Indian tradition in particular, is that there's this non-dual insight into the illusoriness of the self, that the sense of subject-object separation is ultimately spurious, and that on the other side of that, there really is a freedom that can be discovered in the midst of any experience. It's really compatible with any waking moment, and it doesn't actually need anything about the contents of consciousness to change, because really it's just the nature of consciousness itself. And that's what's potentially misleading about so many spiritual teachings and spiritual paths. So many of them seem predicated on the belief that you really need to make wholesale changes in the content of consciousness to make progress, right? What it's like to be you right now, the ordinary sense of neurotic confinement to, an ordinary mind that wants things and fears things and regrets the past and worries about the future. There's something about that is intrinsically a form of bondage. I mean, the evidence of your unenlightenment really is available to you right now, and you just need only recognize it. And then the spiritual path becomes a kind of vigil where you're waiting, whatever your practice is, you're waiting for the auspicious changes to occur in your experience. And obviously psychedelics is another approach to this, where you haven't had certain insights or experiences, and then you take acid or you take MDMA or psilocybin, and you seem to break through into a new layer of mind, and you recognize that there's a landscape of mind that can be traversed. But then many people who get into that begin to believe that traversing it really is just a matter of linking peak experiences together. You have to keep getting high in order to make progress and have more insights. And I'm not saying all of that effort is wasted. I've drawn a lot of benefit from psychedelics and from various peak experiences I've had in meditation. But any peak experience you have, you eventually cease to have. I mean, it's just the very nature of any experience to arise and pass away. So it's all impermanent. And so,
especially if it is a peak,
at a certain point, it becomes a memory. Yeah. And so it can't be a matter of just having more peak experiences. Ultimately, I mean, if your wisdom, if your deepest wisdom was contained in that peak experience you had last month at Joshua Tree or at Burning Man, well, then by definition, it's just a memory, right? And so in the present moment, all you have is your thoughts about it, and ultimately that's not good enough. I mean, that's just not. That's a Band-Aid applied to the present moment's experience. What we all need is an ability to recognize the intrinsic freedom of awareness in this moment, regardless of what is happening. Basically, in my view, your highest spiritual insight, your highest contemplative wisdom, is whatever you can actually access now in this moment. And if you can't find it now, in the middle of the bad reaction you just had to the thing your spouse said, or the email that you just received that wound you up. It's always a matter of, okay, what is available to you now when you remember that you're not this schmuck who's tied in knots over an email. You're not the guy who can't take criticism. You're not who you were a moment ago when you were captivated by that thought that was making you so unhappy. Now the spell is broken, and you can actually pay attention to something. What is available to your attention? What can you be to use a Buddhist term? What can you be mindful of in this moment? And in the beginning, many people feel that all there is to be mindful of is the evidence of their unenlightenment. They're mindful of anxiety. They're mindful of how restless they are. They're mindful of how distracted they are. But ultimately, once the practice really gets going, what you can be mindful of is the fact that there is no subject-object divide in awareness in each moment. And that centerless experience really is freedom. And it's a freedom that's not predicated on anything about experience changing. So, for instance, if you become mindful of that in the midst of a feeling of anger, say, or anxiety, your freedom arrives even before the physiology of anger and anxiety have dissipated. Because in that moment, what was anger a moment ago or anxiety a moment ago has no meaning psychologically or philosophically or in any other way. So it has no behavioral implications. It really is just like, a feeling of heat on your face, or a feeling of fluttering in your chest. Or it's like it has no more meaning than a pain in your knee or indigestion. Really, it's just this peripheral sensory phenomenon, and there's no center to the experience of being aware of that. And there's no you in the middle of it. And so anyway, we can talk about what I mean by the illusoriness of the self if you want to, but my basic point is that it really comes down to what is available to attention now, and the rest is just something you're thinking about.
Well, actually, Epictetus talks about this. He says, someone's working out, they're lifting weights. You don't say, "Show me your muscles." You say, "Show me what you can lift," right? And so, as far as your insights go, or your breakthroughs go, or your discoveries go, or the philosophy you studied goes, that's great. But what matters, and I would agree with what you're saying, what matters is what you can do in the present moment. What matters is what you can do in moments big and small in your actual life. You're not enlightened if you can't be happy doing the dishes. You're not wise if you can't see through the noise that's happening around you. If you can't be a good and decent ordinary person in ordinary circumstances.
Yeah. I would add though that people shouldn't expect that these ordinary contractions into negative states of mind won't keep occurring.
Sure.
It's just that the crucial difference between freedom and bondage is how quickly you can wake up from them, and what waking and whether you can really wake up from them. So it's the half-life of these emotions. So, I constantly get angry or anxious or impatient, or there's no
Sure.
negative emotion that is fundamentally foreign to me now. But the truth is, none of these states, they've all begun to function like mindfulness alarms for me, right? So it's a very punctate experience. It becomes like a salience signal, where something makes you angry, and you orient to it in the world. Maybe these emotions contain information, right? There's very often something that's just happened that has jumped out of the background of ambient noise, and it's either worth paying attention to or not. It either requires a response or not. But anger and anxiety and these other negative emotions are almost never the right state to be in to marshal that response, right? You want a cooler head to actually act in the world. And the moment you get out of your thoughts about why you should be angry or why you should be anxious, and just feel the energy of the emotion and let it dissipate, the half-life of these states is very, very short. You can't stay angry for more than maybe 10 seconds at a time, apart from then getting lost in thought again and dredging the anger up again. And so it really is in how quickly you recover and let it dissipate, and not have your subsequent thoughts and actions contaminated by that initial reaction. That's the major gain, I think, to hope for. Because people have this expectation that if they're meditating correctly, or if they're really wise or spiritual, or they have their values in the right place, they'll never feel certain emotions again. And that's maybe in the limit that's possible for a Buddha, but I don't think I've met people who've achieved that. And what I have met in myself is progress in terms of the half-life and just how quickly you wake up from your initial contraction.
Yeah, in Meditations, Marcus Aurelius says, when you're jarred unavoidably by circumstances, what you have to try to do is gather yourself, and he says, come back to the rhythm. And I think about it kind of like in music. If you're ever playing with a group of musicians, the beat is sort of there, the groove of the thing that you're jamming on is there, and you can mess up, you can come off the beat, you can make a mistake, you can get distracted, but the song is going on, right? The other people are continuing to play, and you can plug right back into it. You can stop, count to 4, and get back into it. And so, yeah, whether you want to call it a half-life or a rhythm or waking up, there's a bunch of ways to express this idea that you come off, you get disoriented, but then you find your bearings and you get back to it. And the quicker you do that, that's the mark of wisdom, not the impossible standard of never doing it in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
And I actually found,
we tend to keep score.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I would just say that we tend to keep score in ways that are not helpful. The evidence of our unenlightenment is always in the past, right? It's always the thing that happened a moment ago. It's always that thing that happened yesterday. It's actually not findable in the present if you really pay attention. And so it's like we're always free to just begin again and not rehearse to ourselves these kind of litany of psychological crimes we have perpetrated in the past, because it really is it's a very simple choice. You can be lost in thought and thinking about the past and telling yourself a story about who you were a moment ago or yesterday, or you can actually make contact with your life in the present, unencumbered by this self-talk. And I'm not saying you need to block thoughts, because thoughts are going to continually arise, but you need to recognize them as further appearances in consciousness. There's a very big, the crucial difference is between being identified with thought, not recognizing these appearances. It's usually auditory or visual or some combination of the two, where it's very strange that most of us most of the time feel identical to our thoughts. We feel identical to a voice in our heads. We feel identical to a stream of images, and yet these are just appearances that can be witnessed from a prior condition of just being aware of them. They're arising in this condition that we call consciousness or awareness, and yet uninspected and unrecognized, they feel like us. So you and I are talking right now, and people listening to us or watching us are thinking while they're struggling to follow the train of this conversation. They have a voice in their head. Most of them, certainly 99% of them, have a voice in their head that is competing for their attention. So they'll be thinking, well, what's he talking about? Or like, wait a minute, that's not what I've read about Buddhism. That's not what. And who are they talking to, and who's talking? And this is an automaticity that is claiming their attention moment to moment. But more important, it actually it feels like I. It feels like me. It feels like it defines a center, a subject in the midst of experience, in addition to experience. It seems like there's a thinker in addition to the flow of thought. And when you really look, you find that there isn't, and you discover that the self, the sense of I in the middle of experience, is what it feels like to be lost in thought without knowing it. And so that really, the spell that continually has to be broken by meditation is this continuous habit of being distracted by and identified with thought.
I want to go back to psychedelics for a second because it connects to something you're talking about, the sort of everydayness of what you do in this present moment. There's something that's bothered me about, and I'm not a psychedelics person, but I don't have a strong opinion about it, I guess, but there's something that's bothered me about calling that the work, right? Calling doing psychedelics the work. When the reality is the work is what we're talking about here. The work is the thing happens. You get cut off in traffic. You're thinking about what other people are thinking about you. You're tempted between right and wrong. Like the work, that's the work, right? Having the peak insight in an experience or reading about it in a philosophy book or listening to a podcast. I mean, I guess that's not work, but it's not the work, right? Like the work is the choices and actions you take in your life. And I guess as someone who cares about the meaning of words, that seems like a wrong way to think about it.
When you say you're not a psychedelics person, have you ever taken any of these compounds or not?
No. I guess I've found too, maybe this is more biased for me, but I have yet to hear of an experience from a person doing psychedelics that I have not found in literally every philosophy text. You know what I mean? I haven't been that blown away by the insights. I am willing to concede there's a difference between being told something and feeling it. So I respect the people coming away with the wowness of what they got. But some of the insights I hear just seem so pedestrian or basic to me that I haven't been compelled to plunge into that world.
Yeah. Well, the greatest utility for me was in the beginning, and this is admittedly something that not everyone needs, but I think I needed it. I mean, it's hard to know what would have happened without psychedelics in my case, but when I was 18, I took MDMA for the first time, and the breakthrough for me there was that it revealed to me in a very visceral way that my patterns of thinking and the quality of my attention had been radically limiting my experience in life. Like it had never occurred to me that it was possible to have a fundamentally different experience emotionally and socially and ethically. Like I hadn't, I'm sure I had made some contact with philosophy at that point, at least in high school, but it hadn't really landed with me. I mean, I didn't see myself on any kind of path. It's very hard for me to even recall who I was then, but I was not a budding mystic or someone who even was interested in the nature of his own mind. And I was an intellectual kid, but I was very anchored to conceptualizing everything, and I have no idea what I would have thought if you had suggested that I might want to try to meditate to be happier or to discover something about the nature of my mind. And I think if I had tried to meditate, I probably would have just bounced off the whole project because I wouldn't have had a natural aptitude for it. I wouldn't have suddenly gotten very concentrated and started to feel something interesting happening. So I would have looked inside and felt that there was nothing much to see. And then I just would have gone on thinking that meditation doesn't work and that all of these religious people are, every account of spiritual experience or mystical experience in the literature is just a symptom of temporal lobe epilepsy or conscious fraud, or it's just some species of delusion. And I think, and obviously there are a lot of people who go through life that way. And for these people, the problem is if you give them, if they're even available to be given a practice like meditation or a book to read that is just chock full of insights, or that you and I would think is chock full of insights, or you send them to a yoga class or whatever it is, it's quite possible that nothing will happen, right? They really will just bounce off. Now, the unique power of psychedelics, and MDMA technically is not a psychedelic, but close enough. The unique power of certain of these drugs is that for almost everyone, something is guaranteed to happen. Right? It's like it's a very rare person who can take a sizable dose of any of these drugs and have nothing happen. Although I guess that occasionally occurs. Now what happens is a bit of a spin of the roulette wheel, depending on what compound you're talking about. Certainly with a proper psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin, you could go to heaven, or you could go to hell, or you go somewhere in between. But you're going to go somewhere, right? You're going to have a non-ordinary experience, and that'll prove to you, beyond any possibility of doubt, that it is possible to have a very different experience. Your being in the world.
Pull up.
And for some people don't need that. Some people don't, because that's obvious, and they're working it out through meditation and philosophy and in other modes, and they're motivated by that possibility. They understand that the mind is a landscape that can be explored. But for people who don't, psychedelics can really prove something that it would be hard to prove any other way. So that was the major utility for me, is it just showed me that there was much more to my mind and to the possibilities of living a fulfilling life than I had realized.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me, and I'm perfectly willing to say to each their own. It just strikes me that the work, what we label what, I think, is indicative. And to me, the work is not just the meditation, therapy, reading, and all of that, but the work is also applying the insights on a day-to-day basis in the real situations of life, not the peak experience. The peak of experiences are, by definition, not ordinary or consistent.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that if there really is a way of being radically free in this life, if there is some ultimate goal here that can be actualized, it has to be compatible with ordinary waking consciousness. I mean, it has to be the kind of thing you can notice about yourself and about the nature of your mind while you're walking down the street or driving a car or having a conversation or looking at your email. It can't be elsewhere. Right? It's not to say that there aren't very interesting experiences to be had elsewhere when you're 400 micrograms into an LSD experience, or you've been meditating for 3 months in silence and you're as concentrated as you've ever been. Those are wonderful experiences to have, but whatever can burn off by virtue of your using your attention in a different way, that thing can't be the ultimate thing that is your refuge. And so, I think I share with you this sense that it really is in our moment-to-moment living of our lives that our practice is real, and our wisdom is real, or it isn't.
And I do like that about meditation, probably unique among all the philosophical practices outside of journaling, which I would probably argue is the sort of Western
500
equivalent of meditation. But it's a thing that you do, right? It's something you do. It is a practice, right? It's not philosophy isn't supposed to be this thing that you read one time and get. It's supposed to be, go back back to music, it's scales that you run through, or it's a thing that you do. It's a set of stretches, it's exercising. That to me is what the great philosophical traditions give us. It's a thing to do.
Yeah, although ultimately I would say it's a thing you cease to do, right? So in the beginning, meditation seems like a practice that you're adding to your life. It seems like stretching, or it seems like exercise, where you weren't doing it and now you're doing it, and you're hoping to get some benefit from it. You might even be getting benefit from it. You can feel the benefits. But ultimately, the kind of meditation that I teach over at Waking Up, and that I'm interested in, and there are other types of meditation, but mindfulness-based meditation, and ultimately non-dual mindfulness, is a matter of ceasing to be distracted by thought. It's not a matter of ceasing to think. It's ceasing to be identified with thought and lost in kind of the dreamscape of thought. And so you're actually doing less rather than more. You're not strategically paying attention to something. Although in the beginning you might be, like the first exercise you might do is to pay attention to your breath, and then once you have some facility for coming back from being lost in thought and returning to the breath, and so you know the difference between being lost in thought and actually paying attention to something, then you open it up to everything you're experiencing, sounds and sensations and thoughts and emotions. But ultimately, the change in you is in it's almost like a figure ground reversal, where you're like the thing that was seemed to be an artifice in the beginning is actually the ground of where you always already are, and you're sort of waking up and returning to what is already the case. And so it's not additive. Whereas there are practices that can seem, by their very nature, additive. Like if you're doing a mantra-based practice, you're rehearsing a Sanskrit phrase in your head, and you're adding that, and then you could wonder, well, why am I adding that to my experience, and what does it mean? And is there something magical about Sanskrit? Why couldn't this be in some other language? And so there's a basis for doubt there. Ultimately, with mindfulness, you're not doing anything other than noticing what is happening all by itself. I mean, everything's arising all by itself. Thoughts, sensations. It's just there's nothing that you, the witness, are bringing into being, and it's in that recognition that you see that there's that the problem that you thought you needed to solve a moment ago isn't even there, right? The problem of your anxiety, the problem of your disappointment, the problem of your it's always this thought-based delusion that something that's not actually present here needs to be unraveled. I'm not saying that there aren't challenging experiences. I mean, there's obviously things like physical pain, and that doesn't magically go away once you know how to meditate. But so much of our suffering in response to something like physical pain is our psychological contraction around it, and our anxiety about it, and our fear that it won't go away, and our fear of what it means, and do I need to get an MRI, and is this cancer, and like all of that. Again, you can figure all that out. I mean, I'm not saying you never need to go to a doctor and never need to get an MRI and that you're never going to get cancer, but each stage along the way, there's always the question of what is worth paying attention to now. And this is where the Stoics have this very much in hand. I mean, this whole issue of what is the function of worry, right? I mean, either you can do something about this problem right now, or you can't. If you can do something about the problem, well, then do that thing. And if you can't, worry doesn't add anything to your capacity to do anything. It just makes you miserable twice over. So, once you recognize that, it becomes easier to just relax back into the mere awareness of what is actually happening right now.
Yeah, for the Stoics, it's not things that upset us; it's our opinion about things. And the ability to sort of catch when you're having an opinion is a real superpower. And to me, that is, what meditation is, the ability to realize, or mindfulness is the ability to realize when you have thoughts and engaging in extrapolation, speculation, judgment, as opposed to just being in whatever that thing is, which, as you said, it could be pain. You could be in pain, but what we add on top of that, I think is fair to say, is, and I die from it, and I'm a victim, the on and on and on. We're adding all this language around it instead of simply dealing with the first impression or the reality. So I'm curious about the app, because it's something I think about too. I mean, it's great. I know so many people that rave about it. It's weird to take this timeless, ancient thing and make it a thing that people can use and purchase. I think about that. It's not that it's I feel ethically challenged about it, but I do try to think about I think of myself as this steward of this thing that's been beneficial to me, and I put time and energy and work in it, and that's why I feel comfortable selling it as a thing. But I really liked your idea that you charge for it and then you give it away for free, and you basically can't afford to pay for it. I've always found that impressive.
Yeah, that's been my approach with all my digital media. So my podcast is also a subscription podcast. I don't run ads on it. I just think there's really two priorities for me here. I mean, one is just from the media business side. I feel that we have suffered a race to the bottom in how we value digital media. I mean, the ad-based business model of the internet, I think, really screwed us, and never more so than on social media with things like Facebook. But really across the board, it has given everyone the sense that digital content should be free, right? It's like you shouldn't have to pay for anything that's digital, because the expectation is it all should be ad supported. And as I'm sure you've talked about elsewhere, this has created a really perverse set of incentives in our economy, where we just, people are being manipulated, their attention is being gamed in ways that are beneficial to companies but not beneficial to the person, and it becomes, we have built these various outrage machines that spread divisive and largely false content, and it's given an immense agency to liars and lunatics, and has made it very hard to make sense at scale. And we're various people are working to unravel that in various ways, and that's something I've talked about a fair amount on my podcast. But so I've always felt that the better model is a subscription model. On some level, you get what you pay for, and it's not an accident that Facebook and Twitter and these other platforms have fairly shattered society, and yet a service like Netflix can just show you good movies and good television, and you pay for it, and it's fine. So I would like a lot more of Netflix and a lot less of the Facebook, Twitter experience in general. But in addition, I feel that given the nature of the content, given that these practices and this kind of thinking is so life-changing for people, I have always felt an ethical responsibility to make it available to anyone who needs it, so that money is never the reason why someone can't get access to it. So really, I'm doing something that, from a business point of view, seems a little paradoxical. I mean, waking up is more expensive than other meditation apps, and I think it's probably, I think the price will probably go up in the future, because I think the whole category has been unnaturally anchored to free, in the end. And I do want to build a very successful business that can do lots of cool things out in the world, and I want people to be paid well. I've got, I give people, health insurance and dental insurance, and it's a company that's growing and all of that. But I never want money to be the reason why someone can't get access to it. So, and people just have to send us an email, and they get free access. And there were days, during COVID where 1,000 people a day would send that email. And we would, I've got a major customer service team. 95% of their effort is just dealing with free accounts. Right? So it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. It's a strange thing because I can't quite recommend this business model to other people. Like I do think that, for instance, if Netflix had my policy, I think Netflix would be destroyed. I think if Netflix said, "Listen, we never want money to be the reason why you can't watch our great shows and movies, so just send us an email if you want it for free." I think probably 100 million people would send that email because they would rather have Netflix for free, and there would be no Netflix. And so it's a very, I feel, frankly, I'm in an uncomfortable situation because I don't know what to recommend to other people. I really feel like it's a wonderfully ethical way to have a digital business. And I feel great about it, but I just feel very lucky that it's working for us, because it's very easy to envision a world where it wouldn't work, and I think it wouldn't work for certain other businesses.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? And I think this is a thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, business people, artists sort of fail to sit down and do. Is like, if you have some sense of what you're trying to accomplish, and your aim is not to take over the world or build a billion-dollar behemoth or something, you're able to make these sort of ethical decisions because you haven't tied yourself to some sort of rocket ship, or you haven't taken lots of money from other people who, aren't willing to trade profits for impact. And so I think I like this sort of smaller business model of trying to make something cool. My time is worth money, so I'm not giving it away for free for people who can easily afford to pay. And I'm willing to have the people who can't pay subsidize some of the people who can't pay. But I'm not trying to build the next Facebook or Twitter, because those are wicked economics and incentives to tie oneself to. And once you do, it's very hard to scale it back.
Yeah. No, it's it's the Wild West out there, as you know, in digital media, and everyone's just trying to figure it out. But I'm very happy to be out of the ad world, and I'm just very happy to have a relationship with my audience that allows for this kind of trust, right? And I do feel like the people who pay for my podcast and for waking up, in general, are happy to know that people who can't pay are getting subsidized by their subscriptions. It's not I don't think people feel foolish to pay when it's possible not to pay. I think people understand the spirit of this, and it just feels very good. And obviously I recognize that it's only digital media that really allows for this. You couldn't do this with physical books or something that didn't have essentially a zero marginal cost per item. But so it's fun. It's a fun side of it.
I mean, I would have loved, when I wrote my first book about sort of media and incentives of media in 2000, I was writing in 2011, I thought sort of subscriptions would be this kind of magical change in incentives that would make everything better. I think it's improved things in a lot of ways. I think it's, on the whole, better than the sort of clickbait sort of page view model. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is I think it's a good example of this, is, and I like Barry Weiss a lot, I know her, you're sort of the last man standing of the intellectual dark web that did not either turn into a complete grifter or utterly lose their mind. And I think a lot of that is about audience capture and a different kind of incentives. I mean, some of it's algorithmic, but it does seem that something went sideways there, or maybe the critics were right all along because they saw through a group of these people. But That's been a strange journey to watch over the last couple of years. A sad one, really.
Yeah, yeah, no, it has been. I think audience capture is part of it. I mean, I have it now. We're talking about the podcast side of my life, not waking up, because
Yes.
waking up is blissfully unencumbered by all of these political um,
Sure.
controversies, and it's really it's just as a from the side of producing this content, it's really been interesting to row in two boats in this way, because in the waking up boat, so superficially my podcast and the app waking up should be very similar experiences. I mean, I'm just pushing out MP3 files to the universe,
Sure.
right? And it's just me producing audio, me having conversations, me following my interests as they arise. But because over at Waking Up, I'm focused on the most important things I've ever learned, that is really focused on how to live an examined and fulfilling life. What I get back is just pure positivity, and it's just and it was really eye-opening for me, because I started the podcast first, and the podcast is where I touch all these
500.
controversial culture war issues, and I spent a lot of time on thinking about interesting things that are not political too, but I certainly don't shy away from politics, and the feedback there has been always a mix of love and hate, and so I lost sight of the fact that it was actually possible to have a career and have a mode of engaging with the world where what you get back is virtually 100% positive, right? And so it was pretty eye-opening for me to start waking up and just see, well, this other channel here where, like, there's no mismatch between what I'm intending to put out and what people are receiving. People aren't lying about what I said, and they're not pretending to misunderstand me. It's just a love fest. And then over here in my podcast life, it is just a war, at least half the time. So that difference has been interesting. But yeah, as far as what's happened to the so-called IDW bunch, audience capture is a real thing, and I've avoided it because, again, it was the one thing that I felt was possibly corrupting of my podcast, because I don't have sponsors, so there's no concern about being dropped by them, right? So I bypass that concern, but it would be possible, even with a subscription business, to detect the signal in the noise of feedback and recognize, okay, this is what my audience wants from me, and they're going to pay me more if I keep delivering this kind of pablum. But very early on, because I'm not actually partisan politically, I'm not actually tribal, I really do just call balls and strikes as I see them, and I try to be intellectually honest across the board, and I try to be intellectually honest even when someone who I really feel is worthy of criticism is being criticized unfairly. I mean, it'll take somebody like Trump. I mean, there's no, I've been as critical of Trump as I think anyone on earth at this point. But when I see one of his detractors say something that's actually not true, but landing a false blow on him,